So hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. We apologize for a little bit of technical difficulties. Probably everyone knows me, but in case you don't, I'm Nataliya Kalava, and I'm the owner of American Valuations, which is a business valuation firm. And with me here, I have today Brianna McCown, and Brianna is a senior financial analyst at my company. And today we will talk to you about just general market insights. We'll look at what type of businesses have been bought and sold in the marketplace and at what market multiples. And we will cover some of the insights or industry trends, and we'll try to make it more or less interactive so you can provide your insights and feedback to us as well. So the agenda for today's meeting, we'll cover a little bit about the economic environment, which has been very interesting lately. Then Brianna will give a general market industry overview where different multiples have been for different industries. We'll cover some selective industries in more detail, and then we'll just illustrate the example. So moving on to the next slide. Go ahead. So if you look to the graph on the left, it's important to note before we value any company or determine what the environment is like, we need to know where we have been, where we are, and where we're heading. So in 2020, of course, the economic growth rates were highly negative. And then in 2021, we rebounded to almost 6% economic growth rate. And then in 2022, unfortunately, everything dipped to 1.7% GDP growth rate. And then in 2023, the outlook is not that bright either. What I find very interesting is the graph to the right. We can see and compare that in 2019, overall nominal GDP was at roughly 21.4 trillion. And in 2020, went down to 20.9, but 27% out of that GDP was driven by various government stimulus fiscal packages, which leads us to what we have now is a fairly volatile economic environment and record high inflation. So that being said, how does that impact how much businesses are worth and how much we're pricing different companies? Well, the graph in the middle at the bottom shows you three different dots. I don't know how well you are able to see it, but those are the three key value drivers when we appraise any company. We'll look at the company's current cash flows or earnings, or an economic benefit stream that we can benchmark against other companies. We'll look at the projected cash flows or earnings, and then we'll also determine, well, how risky those cash flows are, right? Because we can invest in a potentially very profitable company, but that potential may not realize. There's high risk, so we can lose everything. So given these factors and the high inflation, how do we deal with that when we're appraising the companies? Well, there's a few different ways. One, we adjust the cash flows of the company. A lot of our clients we're seeing are projecting lower cash flows for the next 3-5 years because of that high uncertainty. We adjust the profit margins. We adjust the discount rate for the riskiness for the business. And also to calibrate what the value might be, we can use different scenario analysis. So if we move to now the general market industry data. In our presentation today, you will see the data that we have taken from the DealStats database. DealStats collects transactional data from M&A advisors, business brokers, and they also search the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission filings to gather the information. Overall, they have a plethora of data. They have over 42,000 transactions. What we focused on specifically, or the sample of data that we extracted, which we believe, I believe is representative of the market dynamics, are the transactions that happened only in the state of Florida for 2022. So from January through about mid-September or so. So that's kind of just to give you an idea. So it's not every single business that have been bought and sold in the marketplace. It's just what this database has captured. And then the breakdown between different industries, again, is just driven by those transactions in the state of Florida for 2022, given this resource. And so that brings us to a fun polling question. How many transactions do you think took place in the state of Florida in 2022? Is it A, 0 to 300 transactions? Do you think up to 500 businesses were bought and sold, up to 700 or above 700? And just kind of raise your hands, I guess, and we can see what your answer choices might be.
I'll guess D.
You said D?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nobody else is brave enough?
I would say D. I mean, the qualifier, because what's the size of the transaction you're talking about? Is there a
Grand total, well, specifically asset transactions. So I forgot to mention, it's just how many businesses you think this database captured in 2022, all types of asset transactions.
So it can be a $50,000 transaction?
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, I'd say D for sure. Well, not for sure, but D.
Okay. All right. So let's see what the answer is. So the answer actually is 569. So I don't remember what C, it's C. C. All right. So some of you got it right. We can compare the transactions on the graph below from 2018 to 2020. So in 2018, there was 672 transactions. In 2021, actually was better through this time period, was 702 businesses that were bought and sold. And so far this year to date, we see a decrease. So we have 569. Anyone surprised by it or any type of feedback?
It's encouraging.
How is that? It went down.
No, not in 2021. It was higher than in 2000.
In 2022, we went down from 702 to now 569.
Yeah, but it's only 9 months.
It was the same for the last period. Yes, we're comparing like the same period year over year.
Well, I would say rates have drastically influenced this for sure. I mean, the treasuries were 1.6 in March and they're 4% today, the 5-year. So, and again, and Prime has done the same thing. So, yeah,
absolutely. Yes, Mark. And so overall, we can see that some of the smallest businesses sold for had sales of 20,000 and went as high as almost 16 million. And then you see the breakdown of multiples. It's a bit hard to see because it's a very broad set of industries. So we'll dive in a little bit deeper sense into each industry, but you can see that the overall price to EBITDA multiple across all industries in 2022 in the state of Florida was 1.7 times, and that sales multiple was roughly 0.6 times. So, and now for a very fun polling question number 2. What industry do you think had the highest number of transactions? And you see the answer choices: A, real estate, healthcare, C.
I say C.
Okay, Jody thinks it's C. Michael? Since I can't call.
In what year? 2020?
Yeah, 2022. Yeah. Ashley?
Real estate?
I would say real estate.
Okay. Mark?
I can't get my, I'll
I would
say
say D because a lot of restaurants trade all the
D.
time. So I'm going to say D.
D.
Okay. And then I stepped out. I forgot to introduce Dan Creek is here with us. He is, he's actually our CPA, but he's also a guest attending this presentation. So Dan, if you're listening in, what do you think? What do you think?
I have to admit the D, restaurants and dining, does sound like the most probable, but I'm going to go with B for healthcare.
Okay. And what about you, Pete?
I'm gonna defer to some of these folks that probably are more in the M&A marketplace, and I would guess the smaller businesses in Florida in particular, like restaurants and dining, might be the answer. I'll go with that.
Okay, good choice. So, and the answer is, congratulations, it is restaurants and dining. Out of 569 transactions, 122 were different dining establishments, restaurants, pubs, et cetera, et cetera. And we actually see the same trend is still happening. We have a couple of restaurants that we're looking at just in our firm and had a few last year as well. That is followed by various janitorial, pest control, cleaning, remediation companies, transportation, auto repair, plumbing, heating, ACs in the top 5. And then we had landscaping companies, nail, spa, salons, retail stores, so on and so forth. And so we will cover also the healthcare and real estate, even though they had slightly fewer transactions, but we feel like it's still relevant to the overall to the overall discussion. And now Brianna will cover in more detail just comparison between different multiples across different industries.
Yeah, so we'll start looking at the sales multiples across these selected industries. So first, the sales multiple represents the price divided by the company's revenue. So we see in this graph here, most of the multiples on average come in below 1, meaning the price for these companies is below their revenues. So we see within the retail sector, they do have the highest sales multiple in comparison to these other industries. Their sales multiple comes in at 0.88x. And then on the flip side, the industry with the lowest multiple is dining. And that one's coming in at 0.39x. But now we have our third polling question. So what industry do you think has the highest EBITDA multiple?
Real estate.
Real estate?
Yeah, I would look smart and say the same thing because I think we cheated, but I would have said healthcare, thinking that was the highest multiple. That next screen is telling. I would never have thought that.
All right, since we cheated.
We did get a little peek at the answer.
You were right.
So real estate is a pretty obvious outlier here. Plumbing is actually on the top end with the EBITDA multiple is at 6x, and then transport is 7x. Right. So real estate, I mean, they have been pretty profitable, obviously, within the last time period. So that could be playing into why it's such a high multiple. But Nataliya is going to jump into real estate in a couple of slides to kind of dive in a little bit deeper.
So I have a question with the whole real estate multiple thing. Is that brokerages?
Yeah, well, it's actually could be property management, can be brokerages. It's anything that's tied to real estate.
Realtors?
Yeah.
Realtors make a lot of money.
So I will say though, and I will mention it more in my slides, that when we're looking at multiples, and this is an error that a lot of people make, we can't just look at this almost 20 times multiple and say, this is a great multiple. I have a real estate brokerage firm and I'm worth a lot of money. It doesn't really work that way. We have to see if that multiple is meaningful. What do we mean by that? Is it correlated? Does the higher sales price correlated with higher price? Does the higher profitability correlates with higher pricing? So sometimes the multiples can be all over the place and they can be kind of meaningless because there's no correlation, there is no statistical significance. So we'll touch a little bit more on it as we go through that presentation, but that's just something to keep in mind.
Right. So kind of to give a definition of EBITDA, so EBITDA represents earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So it represents the company's earnings before the effects of any capital structure. So it makes it a lot easier to compare companies that do have very different capital structures who use a lot more debt versus a lot more equity. Additionally, EBITDA, it gives us more of a holistic view of a company rather than just sales, because that EBITDA multiple, it includes the cost structure of the company. So it does give us just a broader picture of the company's performance. Next, we'll look at the SDE multiples, the average SDE multiples. So SDE represents seller's discretionary earnings multiple, and SD is calculated by adding the EBITDA plus owner's compensation. So we see across these multiples in these selected industries, there's not too much of an outlier like we saw with EBITDA. They do range from about 1.5x in the salon and nail salon spa industry, whereas on the higher end, the dining has 3.38x. All right, so now we're going to dive into specific industries and just give you overall trends that we're seeing within those industries. So we'll start here with the grocery industry. So we can see based on the average sales, they are coming in about 600,000. So when we look at that number, we're obviously not looking at like a Publix or Whole Foods type of grocery store. We're looking at smaller bakeries, convenience stores, those types of transactions. But we did have a total of 20 different business transactions that we looked at as of this year. So that's where we were pulling all of these average sales, EBITDA, and SDE prices. So we can see the number of businesses in the US for grocery stores at 63,000. When we compare that to other industries like the spa and nail salon industry that has 1.3 million businesses, it's pretty low in comparison. Grocery stores just have a little bit higher barriers to entry. They have a lot more capital investment required to start up a business compared to, let's say, a nail salon. And we can also take a look at the projected revenue growth. It's pretty marginal. It's less than 1% over the next 5 years. And we'll take a look at why here on this next slide. So we see in the industry outlook graph, so we see they've had pretty healthy growth in 2022. It's a little bit less than 4.8%. And then we kind of see that taper off over the next couple of years. So the reason for this pretty healthy growth recently is a number of factors, one of them being disposable income. Disposable income has actually been increased over these past couple of years. When that happens, people do tend to buy more premium products like organic products, all natural products. Grocery stores make much better margins on those types of products than just regular brands. So grocery stores were hugely profitable during this recent time period. And additionally, with those restaurant closures, grocery stores were seeing a lot more customers than they normally would have. So they also profited from those factors. So now we do see the growth kind of taper off over these next couple of years, and that's because all of these factors are expected to reverse. Disposable income is expected to decrease over the next couple of years, so we'll see less of those premium products being bought. And then with those restaurants opened now, those grocery stores are losing those additional customers that they previously had. So are there any questions or anything surprising about the grocery industry that you learned?
Yeah, I'm surprised it had that spike, but that kind of makes sense with COVID. It's just it's a blip based on everyone being in and now that everyone's out.
So what kind of a discount do you account for that? Do you account for a discount if you're doing a grocery valuation because of what happened with COVID?
Yeah, good question. So we would increase that risk premium. And we can see overall the risk premiums have been going up. We had the risk-free rate on a normalized basis, not specifically a 20-year treasury, going from 2.5 now to 3.5, and then plus equity risk premium. And then we add the judgment factor, where we subjectively add an additional, whatever we think the factors might be, the risk factors, we add an additional risk premium there. And then the cash flows. So a lot of the clients are very intuitive about what future may bring. So they know they will experience that dip. So they're automatically slashing their growth 50% or more. Yeah. And that's happening across so many industries, not just groceries. It's kind of scary.
So next we'll take a look at the landscaping industry. We see the number of businesses, it's at 633,000 businesses, which is a lot higher than grocery stores. That's just because barriers to entry are much lower. A lot of people can start a landscaping business if they like. It doesn't require too much certification or anything like that. But we do see in Florida, there's about 60,000 landscaping businesses, which makes up about 9.5% of all landscaping businesses. So Florida does have the most landscaping entities, which shouldn't be too surprising. Florida has really great weather all year round. So that demand for landscaping is pretty constant in the state of Florida. Whereas in other states, more northern states, landscaping businesses will have a lot more seasonal sales compared to Florida. And we can also see, so the projected revenue growth is about 2.5% over the next 5 years. So it's a little bit more positive than what we're seeing within the grocery industry. And that's because landscaping services, their demand follows property markets. So they have had pretty profitable years as of late, just because we've had that really great booming real estate market. So landscaping services have hugely profited from that. Now, we do see those rising interest rates as of late. So that could cause some deflation within the residential markets. And in turn, that may affect the landscaping service business in the next couple of years. Okay, so kind of based on what we've seen with these other businesses and considering barriers to entry, how many plumbing, heating, and AC businesses do you think are in the U.S.?
D. D.
Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Michael.
That's in the
I have no
US.
idea.
Not in the state of Florida, right? It's D,
That's
but
all
US.
U.S.
So everyone says D pretty much.
I'd say D.
So the answer is actually B. There's about 125,000 businesses in all of US. That could be, plumbing does require a little bit more certification and apprenticeship compared to landscaping businesses. So that's why we do see a little bit lower number compared to landscaping. We do see that in regards to the sales, EBITDA, SD, and price, the average is higher than the average Florida transaction. So we're seeing a little bit larger businesses in plumbing on average.
Why would the multiple, the EBITDA multiple, be so much lower in Florida versus nationwide?
So it is an average. It's an average multiple. So if there are any outliers, like a lower, it could be pulling that average down. So that may be why we're seeing such a lower EBITDA multiple here on average. This is one of the industries that we're seeing negative projected revenue growth over the next couple of years. It's one of the few that we are seeing that negative number. And that's because the plumbing industry is tied to construction markets. And we see in the industry outlook, they've had negative growth over this since 2022, and they're projected to continue to have some negative growth over the next couple of years, and then finally expected to break positive in 2026. And that's because a major market segment for plumbing is the commercial sector. We can see it on this graph over to the right. So that top bar represents residential construction. Now the ones below, so those represent healthcare, retail and storage, office buildings, manufacturing, all the commercial sectors. So that makes up about 58% of the plumbing's market segment. And as we know, commercial construction has been pretty stagnant during COVID, and it is expected to continue to be slow the next couple of years, just because commercial does take a little bit longer to recover compared to residential. So that's why we kind of see that slow and negative growth over these recent years, and then finally pop up positive.
What do you think with the hurricane, the last quarter of the year with the hurricane and all the companies, you know, having to remediation companies, public insurance stuff, all of those numbers are going to probably hugely.
It's low, but also skewed, right? Because on a normalized basis, if let's say we're valuing a company, we do want a normalized state of being. So yeah, we can have a spike, but we want to eliminate any one, well, it's not really one time event, we'll have another hurricane, but more or less, yeah, those kind of not recurring.
But that's an awesome point. We're going to have our local area should see a significant lift in the event that took place. So that is a great point as far as locally is concerned.
Absolutely. So Pete says, based on my experience in the real estate industry, we need more of these businesses, exclamation, exclamation, exclamation mark. Difficulties getting good plumbers, HVAC, electricians, etc.
All right, well, now we'll take a look at the janitorial, pest control, cleaning, and remediation industry. So we do see there's 1.2 million of these businesses in the US, so much higher than what we were looking at in these other industries. So that indicates a pretty saturated market. But we do see pretty healthy revenue growth projections over the next 5 years at 3.3%. So we know following COVID, there's just a much higher demand for sanitation. So that is going to help kind of boost that revenue growth over the next couple of years. And that is a trend that we expect to continue to see. We'll also take a brief look at the spa and nail salon. It's also a pretty saturated market with 1.3 million businesses. Now, this industry is heavily tied to economic performance, just because this is a very discretionary expense. If there is an economic downturn, this is one of the things that's cut pretty quickly, and one of the first things that's cut pretty quickly. But we do see pretty good growth within the industry over the next couple of years. And we do have these two multiples highlighted for the sales multiple and the SDE multiple. The reason for that is we ran a correlation analysis for all the multiples to determine if they are reliable to use to value companies. When we did run a correlation analysis for the sales multiple and the SDE multiple, it did come in pretty low compared to what we were looking at with the other multiples, meaning there's not really a strong relationship between sales and price and SDE and price in this case. So we do have those highlighted because we wouldn't consider those very reliable multiples, and we probably wouldn't use those in the valuation since the correlation did come in low.
And why is that?
So when we're running a correlation analysis, it's calculating if there's a linear relationship. So it didn't represent a linear relationship when it was ran. They were all kind of over the place.
But why? Is it this particular industry? And what is it about this industry that doesn't allow, because if it's holding in other industries, why is it not holding in this industry?
So if you think about it from perspective, so feel free, ladies, to add on to that. Most of these salons are owned by families, right? Like Vietnamese families. So when somebody buys it, another family comes in, they probably think we already know what we can bring to the bottom line. We kind of want to know what the revenue is, what the setting is, but we'll bring our staff, we'll bring our own family, our own operations, and we will turn it into our own little venture. So I don't think they necessarily benchmark it to specific earnings like other businesses would, because it's a husband and wife using the business potentially as their bank account to support their lifestyle. So they are not as intuitive into the dynamics of the business. And so obviously somebody walks in and says, okay, well, they have higher sales, I'll pay a higher price. Another party can come in and say, oh, I love this location. I can change the decor. I can do this. I know the sales are low, but I can offer champagne. I can offer wine to my customers, and I can boost the sales. And so they're willing to pay a higher price. And so now you have these transactions that are kind of in the opposite directions of one another, and they don't show that linear relationship that Brianna referenced. So the multiple becomes meaningless. Does that make sense, or did I?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The first thought is if someone understood that dynamic, there'd be a great roll-up opportunity to buy them low and make a lot of money.
It's the typical run the business like a job instead of building an asset that generates cash flow. Anybody
else want to add to our dynamic discussion here?
I can tell you my no girl on shoulders is awesome.
Well, that's a little far from South Shore. Besides, the Instagram just sold me do-it-yourself kit. Oh, it's arriving soon. So we'll talk about retail sector in a second.
All right, so we'll turn it over to Nataliya to go over the next industries.
So thank you, Brianna, for going over the earlier industries. And you can see a slight difference in my slides. They're a bit more clutterier than Brianna's. So just bear with me through my writing. I will not be reading everything, so I will spare you from that. So as far as the restaurants and dining industry goes, there were the highest number of transactions observed. We had 122 businesses that have been bought and sold in the state of Florida in 2022. The minimum sales that a restaurant had was roughly 45,000 and went as high as 6 million. And the lowest price at which it has been sold was $10,000, and the highest was at 3.5, with an average sales price of 359,000, or the median of $165,000. Typically, in a valuation setting, we prefer to use the medians, not the averages, to eliminate any type of outliers that can skew the data. That brings us to some of the multiples. The minimum sales multiple was 0.04 times, which is pretty low, with the median multiple of 0.3 times, and the EBITDA multiples ranging from 0.3 times to 116.6 times. So obviously you can see an outlier just right there. So the median multiple is about 2 times. So if the restaurant makes 150,000 in EBITDA, 2 times, that gives us the indicated value of 300,000 roughly. So some of the key trends that we observe is, and you may have noticed it if you have any type of social media accounts, there are a lot of alternatives that people can now select, meaning there's a lot of meal kits that are being advertised. You can see if somebody is following the ketogenic diet or they're doing smoothie substitutes for their meals. They can order those items and they can be delivered to their homes. With that trend, which similar to grocery stores, is being focused on those healthier options. However, if you have lately been to Burns Steakhouse or any other fine dining places, these restaurants have not been hurt so much. So in the last 5 years, the growth has been pretty low. It's a very highly competitive area. The growth has been 0.7%, so less than a percentage point, and the forecasted growth is less than 2% at 1.7%. With the key success factors, you will see overlapping themes as we will be continuing to go through the slides. They will focus on having the skilled and flexible workforce, and we know there has been a lot of challenges finding workers across many different industries, and you need people to work. There's also an emphasis on technologies. For the restaurants, the atmosphere and ambiance is important, and of course, being in close proximity to key location. Anyone from our group want to add anything from their observations for the restaurants and dining industry experiences? Anyone has ordered any kits from online retailers?
I have one observation. I was at Burns a week or so ago, and I noticed their prices weren't changed from, it'd probably been 6 or 8 months since I'd been there before. And there was I didn't see price difference on the menu. And I thought that was interesting because certainly their cost would have gone up.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps their strategy is absorb the cost because they're already priced at a slightly higher point, but that's a great observation.
Yeah.
Brian, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say this is one of the top industries that people that leave Verizon as a marketing executive or whatever, and all think, well, I cook dinner for 30 people on Thanksgiving, I can run a restaurant. It has a wide range of people with high ambitions buying these restaurants, and they realize that they're not getting into it. I think that probably accounts for some of those lower models, because after 6 months or a year or 2 years, we get a call trying to, get people out of these lower end businesses. The higher end restaurants that are very successful, are there for a reason, but they usually have required a lot of talent and skill, et cetera. So I think that might in one way account for that wide range of these multiples. And some people are desperately trying to get out once they realize they've made an experience that they didn't really expect to do when they got into running a restaurant. So
Good point.
I think the lower restaurants, when I say lower, like, let's say.
Casual dining.
Okay, like the casual dining restaurants, I think we're affecting more staff numbers not showing up and
Yeah.
feeling that, like if the customer, or the higher burns on the TV, those types of restaurants, I think were affected.
Yeah,
Maybe Outback, Province,
absolutely.
you know, some of the middle.
Right, because the more affluent crowd tends to tip better, so the staff will tend to stay versus leave at the lower end restaurants. And I don't know if anyone else noticed, but in the last couple of weeks, I have noticed fewer people actually in the middle range restaurants attending. And I'm thinking that's probably the effects of inflation are catching up with people. But Soho Sushi, for example, in South Tampa, typically is a packed place. In the last couple of weeks have been more than 50% empty. So I find it quite surprising. I don't know if anyone else noticed.
Yeah.
Nobody?
I think so. I mean, I go out to eat a lot, whether it's lunch or dinner. I was at Home Fish yesterday and I was like,
Yeah.
so,
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the labor problem, I'm also seeing, you know, I got kids and we like to go to, you know, standard restaurants like Chili's. We're not doing the Burn Steakhouse, etc. But the experience is getting worse and worse because they're having such a labor problem. So it's almost like, you know, 7 out of 10 times we go to a restaurant, we find it highly dissatisfying. And it's not that they're bad people, they just can't deliver what we used to expect several years ago before the labor problem too. And I think that's having an issue more and more. We're thinking, forget the restaurant, we'll stay home. So it's a problem to deal with for sure.
Fair point. All right. So I guess we're soon-ish running out of time, so I'll try to pick up my pace. So the next industry we looked at was healthcare and home care. There was 11 transactions, so not significant, but since healthcare is kind of important to the overall economy and to everyone, we thought we'll present our findings. So you can see that the revenue forecast is expected to actually decrease, which is surprising, but at a stable-ish rate. Out of the entire sector, most somebody has to leave. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so most of the revenue is captured by hospitals, followed by various doctors' offices. So for the home health and healthcare transactions, the lowest ones generated $144,000 in revenue to the maximum of roughly $9 million, with the EBITDA up to $1.3 million. Average was at $2.6 million in sales to the median of $785,000. And the selling price was as low as $75,000 to the max of almost $11 million, with the median of $650,000. This results in the median multiple for revenue of 0.7 times rounded and the EBITDA multiple of 3.08 times. So this is a fairly broad sector. Some of those overlapping trends that we have seen is, of course, focusing on technology, different remote monitoring systems that can be used not just to provide a more personalized healthcare, but also to cut costs. Of course, relationships with the commercial carriers are important. And then that foundation of telehealth, virtual consults, so on and so forth, are really driving the industry on a forward-looking basis. Anyone has any thoughts or experiences, reflections on the healthcare industry?
Well, I'll just comment. I have a couple clients in the a bunch of clients in healthcare, but they're facing the same challenges really the restaurant industry is with nursing. So, because I also sit on a board of 2 of HCA's hospitals, and where nursing has just been the absolute Achilles heel for whatever you call that for hospitals, because it's just because of COVID, all the nursing industry, they just got wiped out, and they retired early or just left the industry in general, went elsewhere, and just they're totally exhausted. So if you see a nurse or know a nurse, thank them, ask them to stay in the industry, because it's going to be even tougher and tougher as the population gets older and older, because we're running out of nurses right now. So.
Well, and I was told, I don't know who told me, but I feel like somebody in the medical industry that the travel nurses make so much more money.
Mhm.
So a lot of the nurses, because they feel undervalued and underappreciated, they're leaving the traditional hospitals and whatever and just going to become the travel nurses because they make so much more money, and it's, why not? Same with teachers.
Gives them
It's
more
not that there's a
flexibility.
shortage
Yeah.
of teachers, and it's not that there's a shortage of nurses. There is, it's the lack of appreciation and being valued and making the money that they need to make to sustain a okay lifestyle, not even an elaborate lifestyle, just a normal lifestyle.
Mhm.
It's really bad. And honestly, the country needs to do
So you're exactly right. The travel nursing industry has just skyrocketed. Our clients, where they used to get $70 an hour. So I have clients that deploy travel nurses, and they used to get $70 an hour. And during COVID, it went as high as about $1.80 an hour. So, but that has settled back down to about 110, but it just across the board, you're exactly right. The nursing industry, either they left the industry or they did pivot towards travel, because while it's a little more transient and sometimes people don't like that, the pay was just, double what you could get if you settled at home in the hospital. So
I can personally speak to both of those, because I have my middle son is a surgical tech and just took a traveling assignment. He's making 3 times what he was making here in the Tampa Bay area, working in St. Pete. 3 times. And he's moving to some place that's more rural. So his cost of living will be a fraction of what it was living here. He gets it. And my wife, she's so burnt out. It's like, I'm like day trading just to get enough money so she can quit her job, because she's just completely burnt out. Because Pam's been a medical assistant at a walk-in clinic for 15 years. She just can't take it anymore. So, yep. You're exactly right, Mark. What you're seeing,
it's a common theme. It's scary because
yeah.
You're going to get old, and so am I, and someone's got to take care of us.
Somebody's got to take care of us. Exactly. I am old, Mark.
And we, and Jody, I think, is that you commenting in the back? Is that was saying the comment about the travel nurse, or who was that?
Ashley.
Oh, Ashley. Okay. Sorry. So Ashley, yeah, I mean, to your point, again, they're pivoting towards travel, and it's so in the hospitals were paying it because they were getting COVID reimbursements rather than normal reimbursements, but now we're not getting that anymore. So we can't afford that. Contract services is what we call it in the industry. So, but to your point also, again, as they pivot out, unfortunately, we got to find a way for a balance, because unfortunately, the teamwork that takes place in the surgery rooms is different when it's contract services, because they're on 13-week deployments rather than there for 5 years working with the doctor. So there definitely needs to be a compromise. The hospitals probably need to pay up some and help retain these nurses. And the nurses, hopefully they'll decide that they want a little more stable environment, not as transient, because the synergy that takes place when it's not contract services is dynamically different than if it's a lot of transient stuff. So anyhow, I don't mean to harp on it, but you want the best of the best when you're getting surgeries.
Absolutely.
And it really isn't, I'm thinking about it, really isn't a plug and play. It's like any other team effort. You can put the best people on the field, but if they're not playing together, you're not going to get the result. And I don't want to use a sports analogy, but I think football is a great example of it, where you have all these professional players that play, and some teams excel and others don't. And a lot has to do with that what Joe.
Michael, you're exactly right. Cause that, that's normally that's the reason that Tim has changed jobs so many times. The supervision within the healthcare space sucks. People are the worst leaders that are in those roles. Okay. And it just pisses people off. And it's like, because it's so easy to move because people are so desperate to get good help, in the healthcare space, it's easy for them to move. So they do.
It sounds like that's an opportunity for CEOE and leadership development.
It's like the Disney movie Miracle, the hockey team where he doesn't
Yep.
want superstars. He wants everyone who's like really, really good, but not awesome. So that they work together and they don't have egos. Good movie.
I haven't watched all things. So. Okay.
I'll share this one thing about, and this goes across the board for every business. And I deal with a lot of businesses. There are a lot of business owners that have had people for 6, 7, 10 since they started up. And really that internal leadership, whether it's a small pizza restaurant or a high-end manufacturing firm, the way the people are treated, it's not just about money will be good for a year or 2 or 3. I just had a friend of mine who left a $250,000 a year job and went back to $80,000 a year because she was totally burned out. Money will be good for a little while, but treating people like people, giving the lifestyle, caring about what their specific needs are is consistent. And I know when I go to a restaurant or any business, and I don't do restaurants a lot, but any business, and I ask them about the employees and they say, oh, they've been here 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. I know that's about that leader that's run that business. And I know that's a pretty darn good business to sell, bar none, on any other factor out there. We have a real problem about management and leadership. So
100%. Agreed. All right, so we have about only 5 minutes left, so I'll just briefly just share the real estate. So we had the minimum sales in real estate. There were 11 transactions from 70,000 roughly to 2.8 million in sales, with an average of 834,000 and a median of $542,000. And the price at which those businesses were sold, minimum was 95,000, went up all the way to 2.6 million, with a median price of 220,000. And same thing with the EBITDA multiple, we see an outlier of 101.4 times EBITDA, with a median multiple of almost 3 times and the sales multiple of 0.6 times. And again, these businesses, based on our review, vary so highly. There's just some companies have more cost structure layered in if they have other agents, and they're less profitable. And you see other lean organizations that make a lot of money. So you see these big, huge gaps and variability in multiples. But obviously the higher interest rates, increasing borrowing costs, and will temper the demand. Anyone wants to comment for like a minute or so before we jump into the next one? Go ahead.
I'll comment because I'm obviously in
Of
the
course.
day in and day out, right? Last year I did 700 closings, so I can speak to those numbers look accurate to me with regards to especially the median and all that. But with regards to the whole interest rates going up, well, purchase prices are coming down drastically. That's the cycle, right? Interest rates go down, purchase prices go up.
Depending on the area, I would say, because while I'm in South Tampa area, the prices did drop, but they have not dropped dramatically.
Correct.
So
it's dropping. The market isn't crashing. It's not crashing. It's stabilizing. It's coming back to a normal state of being, as opposed to the chaos and crazy and unrealistic interest rates, unrealistic purchase prices, unrealistic expectations that sellers had to get 50, 60, 70,000 over asking, right?
Yeah.
And it does obviously affect the area, but again, with taking it in a range, whether it's St. Pete, West Chase, South Tampa, Wesley Chapel, all the boom that's happening up there. If people would get out of their heads, buyers, and freaking out, oh my God, interest rates are 6%. Okay, yeah, but prices have dropped. You're not paying 30, 40, 50,000 over asking anymore. You're not having to compete with other buyers. You're not having to compete knowing that you're overpaying for a property that eventually is going to level out.
Yeah.
So if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about it.
No, it's
But-
great. I love
But
it.
like buyers need to just stop because they're creating this false sense of reality of, oh my God, the market's gonna crash. So you don't wanna buy a home because it's gonna drop in value. It's not gonna drop in value. We've seen the prices come down to really what they're going to come down to. Is it gonna drop another 40, 50,000 on purchase prices? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because people aren't so desperate either to sell or buy. Or even in the pandemic, they weren't desperate to sell or buy. Everyone was working from home. It created this whole sense of supply and demand. People want what they can't have. So if you tell people there's no houses for them, they want it even more, right? It's the psychology behind it all. It's like the people's mindsets behind it. Oh, we're working from home. We feel like we're in a cage. We need a bigger house. You've been in that house for 8 years. Now all of a sudden you need a bigger house. So a lot of it, I think, also has to do with the psyche behind all of it and what people are going through mentally and emotionally, and people working from home or not working from home. You know, if they're more at home than having to go to an office, their home affects them more than it ever did before. You know?
Yeah.
If I could say one thing, is if you could pull a thread right now, Nataliya, and pull your presentation together as a theme that those of us who are working with business owners and discussing succession and transition and helping them through this process. What's the takeaway that we should have as we're talking to business owners in this next 2 to 3 months?
Well, that is a great question.
That's $1 million question.
$1 million question. So, I always find it challenging to give one blanket answer because it is so client specific or customer specific and what their situations are and where they are, what their goals are. And that response would be tailored. I mean, you will not like my response, but I would say if you have a client and you just want an opinion and you want us to pull the market data, just email us and there's no cost to it. We'll just give you our research tools and our output, and we can tailor that answer to your client.
And so the thing I would say that I think in closing is very helpful is that the business valuation role inside a succession exit transition team is mission critical, and this valuation conversation should be happening no less than every couple of years. Annually would be better, because you really can't figure out where you are and where you need to go next if you don't have a handle on those specific pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a blueprint. You need to know where you're going. If you don't have that and you want to just on a whim make a plan, it's just that plan may not realize. So it becomes a phantom plan. So it's easy to say if we're looking at real estate, oh yeah, you can sell your company and have 100 times multiple, but is it meaningful? No. So those conversations really have to be taken in the appropriate context and where you are in the planning. So, and we can provide those resources and tools. Like I said, there's no cost. We can always pull a research and highlight some bullet points, and then to help you facilitate that conversation with the client.
So before we wrap this up, is there any questions from anyone who's been observing or watching? Thoughts you want to have about the presentation, or anything you would like to say to anyone who's with us today?
I think
No,
that
we covered everything.
Yeah, I can also add this to the commercial versus residential because I do both. I know a lot of the commercial brokers and brokerages that I work with, they all are, they're all really getting concerned because of the dip and drop in sales and commercial inventory the buyers are willing to be able to do because of about their.
I have a question. I guess just a final. So if you're working with a business owner, and how often do you recommend they do like the big valuation to get to have a, because what they think their business is worth versus what it really is worth is there's, an opposite spectrum, I think. So how often should they go through that process, or should they just do like what you said, just get an idea? What do you suggest? What do you recommend?
I mean, if there is any trigger event, that's a good point to do an appraisal on their business, typically the recommendation is annually because valuations is not a static number. It's a snapshot, it's a picture. So how we'll look today may not be how we'll look in a year from now. So, and I have clients who would say, well, no, I think my value should be higher. Well, yeah, maybe if you the forecast points, maybe you hit your target rates and milestones, then you come back in a year and yes, you validate that higher number. But right now you're at the early stage of development, risky, and hence
Yeah,
snapshot today is
a
different.
great example of this is if you got your business value on September 30th in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, you're going to find very different values and you've had very different environments going on. So my recommendation to a business owner is to employ the business valuation member as part of the team that you're building. Have that conversation. You may not need a full-blown valuation each year, but you may want to have some key points that you want to monitor to see those points, and maybe every couple of years redo it in a complete package, much like the financial plan. Once you have a blueprint, you have a roadmap, you can then hit some places, and then depending on what's happening, you can then redo it based on trigger events. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today.